Welcome everyone to this week's IPLD sync meeting. It's January the 31st, 2022. And as every 2 weeks, we go over the stuff that we've worked on and then discuss any open agenda items. What I also like to point out this week is that normally, so we have this public meeting and then we have an after party and everyone is invited to join to, for example, discuss things that if you have, for example, exciting news and you can't share them publicly as it's live stream, feel free to stay for the after party. And then it might happen that we then ask you to leave because then it's the after party for us if we have to discuss any employee things or something, or because it's also like the only time in the week where we discuss in sync between each other. So we also sometimes need some time to chat. All right. And also the other meeting notes. So I would like to ask you to put your name on the attendees list. And so I put it also on the Slack chat, on the chat room. And so we start with a quick round of what people have worked on or if they have any news from the IPLD ecosystem. So first one is Eric.
Oh no, me. Okay. I don't know if I have any huge headliner news lately, just kind of in the grind of things. We had somebody discover a bug in selectors recently. So our Golang implementation has some fixes for something that was previously a bit of a crasher. There's a link in the notes to the fixtures that helped us chase it down. I'm also very pleased with the fixtures because it was one of those nice, clean PRs to the specs repo. So I'm going to point at that one if anybody wants to make fixtures and specs PRs. It's a very good template one. The issue turned out to be something around like the base case of the recursion clauses, and well, a lovely place for off by one errors. Anyway, it's fixed now. If anyone would like to do some documentation review, I finally almost finished a write-up about ADL signaling, and there's a big PR in the IPLD repo about that. To overview it, it introduces the concept of signaling, and like most things in that repo, it's trying to talk about how this works logically, and it's not talking about specific implementation so much. And this document in particular is trying to make sure that it's understood that there are a lot of different ways to do signaling mechanisms and say, hey, code, you need to use this function now. Some of them are also getting implemented. Will Scott, who's also in the call here, has done one of them now. He's done signaling with selectors. So that's cool. I'm going to call that done, right? Yeah, what else? And I had a lot of conversations with somebody this week interested a lot in type systems. And Petar has had a lot of notes about that. I've also recently written up some fresh notes about if we can and might want to extend the definition of unions with another representation strategy. There are some things that we could do that are definitely super, super powerful. They would also add a lot of other trade-offs that might be complex to implement depending on how you go about them. So there's a lot to consider there. And okay, one other random thing that I want to just relay from other people. Pirgos has done some really exciting new work on encryption and block level encryption that they've written up recently. They've got a nice blog post, pirgos.org/posts/bats. That's an acronym for something I've forgotten what. Block access tokens, I think. They've done a bunch of work on not just an encryption strategy, but also on how to glue the authentication token transfer onto the BitSwap transport, if I understand correctly. So if people are excited about that, go read more. I think that's it for me.
Thank you. Next on my list is Will.
Sure. I think the one thing in IPLD land that I'm currently chasing down, we got a request on generation of cars that people want to be able to efficiently generate a car starting from some offset in it. So if a transfer fails, they want to be able to resume it and say, well, now regenerate this car, but starting from, 2 gigs into it, please. Because the HTTP range request that would come in downstream would ask for it starting at some offset in it. And they'll keep context around, so they'll have the same like progress object in their traversal and things like that, but they want to sort of fast forward partway through and then start the traversal. So figuring out exactly how that ability to skip forward and only do the things you need and what you would want to cache looks like through a couple layers, both the car generation and creation part. And then within that, how do you take this underlying IPLD traversal and know how to say, go to this path within this traversal and start from there? And I think the answer is you've got your progress object that you're running through and you do your traversal or your walk, but you just return skip until you get to the place that you need. But you watch sort of the path segments. So you do go down when the current path segment matches the one that you need. So it's when the sort of current path segment that you're evaluating on doesn't match that you skip until you get to the right one. This needs some change to our structure in progress. Right now, progress keeps a map of seen links that it uses to not retraverse links. If that's just a map, you don't have the ability to rewind to a previous worldview where some subset of links have been seen because you don't know which subset of links are seen at any given point. We need to now both collect them in a list of when they're seen as well as the map so that we can say, I'm going back to this position in the traversal. I want to reset my map to the subset that would have been seen at that position. Because you're skipping potentially subtrees that would have caused other links to be seen that are now no longer being seen because you're skipping the whole subtree. Yeah, it's fun. So I believe this can all be done by wrapping the link system and progress in a fun hybrid thing, but we should think about how those two structures should be decoupled to allow that to work, because there's some interplay that's non-trivial in doing this. And so I will have a thing that works, and I look forward to how do we move this to something that both works and is vaguely plausible and mergeable.
Thank you. Next on the list is myself. I've again spent some time on Rust IPLD and Rust multi-formats. Just did a bunch of work, but the exciting thing is that hopefully this week we will have a Rust multi-hash, a Rust CID, and a libIPLD release with some fancy new stuff. And then already the things queue up to be merged into the master branch. So but first getting the release out would be good. And I've already also tested the new stuff that isn't released yet with libp2p and with Forest, which is a Rust implementation of Filecoin. So there it works. So I'm pretty confident that the releases won't break anything major. Also, though the API changes slightly, but that's like, just small changes. So it's not a big deal for those projects. All right, next, that's all I have. Next on my list is Rod.
Yeah, I didn't realize how many things I had until I started writing them. So got a lot of little things. So I was been doing a lot of graph sync work, and it's going through a transition in the messaging format from the current protobuf format to DAG-Siebel, and part of that is we're using bind node, and so it's been a lot of exercising bind node and helping find bugs and rough areas, and Daniel's been doing an excellent job of ensuring that all those rough, dangerous areas are cleaned up and it's production ready. So quite happy with it. It's nice work. Some minor things. GoCar, I made GoCar the V2 block store interface can create just a car v1 now, so it doesn't have to have the index and the header and stuff. So if you want to use all the new stuff with car v1, you can do that, which, this is a use case specific thing why you would want to do that, but there are good reasons why you would want to just make a car v1 and use the v2 interface. And one of the reasons is the CLI now, this car create can now take a version flag. So you can make a car v1. It's not always a car v2, which is nice for Filecoin in particular. And then Go UnixFS node, the ADL for UnixFS. I did some work on that to make it the output happier. So particularly the T size was missing on a few places in some of the nodes, and it's not a huge problem. T size is not meant to be mandatory, but there's two issues. One, it produces different bytes for same input, and two, there is some code that relies on T size to assume the size of a graph underneath a node with DAG-PB graphs. So
part of this was that directories were getting a size of 0, right?
Yeah.
I definitely, I think
not all of them
downloaded-
though. Some of them were. Some of them were right. It's just that in a couple of places.
So I think I downloaded a set of cars from, like, is it car.ipfs.io? There's some like car making website that we've got where you upload files and you get a car back with them. And that was giving me directories with size of 0. And that's what I was going off of in making that. So I did that
one of those
because I found other examples of it happening, but I'm happy to be proven wrong and that we should have been tracking it.
Yeah, as I said, it's not critical. It's just that we do have, like Estuary, I pointed out in that thread, Estuary is actually using this as a way to split graphs up. And when it's wrong, it can trip up. So there's a lot of assumptions that we're doing T size right. Anyway, and the other thing was the HAMT wasn't working for sharded directories. So just did some work on the HAMT in UnixFS node and now making the same bytes. I reckon UnixFS node is getting close to the point where we can start to consider replacing at least some instances of Go UnixFS with it. That would be really interesting to experiment with in Go IPFS at some stage. But it is our most mature ADL, so let's make it good. There's a couple of minor things again. IPLD prime, DAG-CBOR length checking on encode to avoid invalid bytes. This is a really weird case where it was a bug in bind node that was allowing the whole system to produce invalid CBOR bytes. So you'd get this CBOR at the other end that just didn't make any sense. And so this is like a sanity check where it will error in encode if the rest of the system, if one of the type nodes or just one of the nodes is lying about how many elements are in a map. I think it is for that. So yeah, there's a proposal on Go IPLD prime for DAG-CBOR encoded length function, so that you can figure out how many bytes a node will take up when it's encoded in CBOR. There's a discussion in there about whether it's warranted and what use cases this might be useful for. So that can go on. And yesterday I started just a bit of fun, an equivalent of IPLD garbage thing I wrote in JavaScript a while back, just to produce garbage data. I don't know if we have this in Go, and I really want it. And so I have a working one now. I just need to write some more tests for it, but you can just ask it. You can give it a rough size, and it'll sort of randomly make you nodes of varying complexity that you can then run through things like an encoded length thing to check that it works. And then last week I spent a couple of days working on helping Lindsay get ready for the PLN Launchpad, pulling together an IPLD curriculum. We did a bootcamp version 0 last year, and using the learnings from the bootcamp to do the Launchpad, pulling together a bunch of curriculum, a lot of the stuff off IPLD.io, pointing to things there, videos and other things, putting it all together in a curriculum with some write-up around it. That was a really quick quick bit of work, but there's a lot of text in there, and it will undergo a lot of changes because that was a really sort of rough first draft. So that's happening. Launchpad is happening this week, so it was sort of a rush to get just that shipped, and then I assume that Launchpad version 2 will be even more clean than that. Anyway, that's me.
Thanks. Next one is Johnny.
Yeah, howdy y'all. I haven't been here for a while, but I've been at the intersection of DIDs, decentralized identifiers, and verifiable credentials, mostly in the healthcare space, which is my day job. And that's like smart health cards with COVID credentials. So we worked on that before COVID actually started. And now we're working on something with consent management for release of information using verifiable credentials and ideally IPLD. But a lot of that has to do with encrypted data lockers or this idea of object capabilities or chained credentialing, ideally where IPLD actually is a perfect fit for that. It's just a matter of convincing other standards that IPLD is mature enough actually to handle these use cases.
That's super cool. So next on my list is Big Lab.
Howdy, thanks for letting me join in. For those I haven't met, I'm one of the engineering managers here at Protocol Labs and excited to be getting more engaged here, but awesome to see all the progress and updates. Yeah, no exciting technical accomplishments for me, but there's this year's Protocol Labs is pushing to get more of its just internal coordination, et cetera, happening closer to where the community is working. And so a big one of those speed bumps is just the entrenched Protocol Lab Slack that we have. So in process on proposal and process for like moving out of that into spaces like in a Discord. More to come on that, but that's what's happening, and hopefully you'll see more activity on this front here in February.
Cool. Yeah, I guess that we our public channel is already, or we try to push it already for years, I think. That the team is on the public IPLD channel in Matrix, which is also bridged to Discord. And yeah, so I guess it's a good reminder that we all should spend more time on that one and post our things there rather than internally. So yeah,
we'll have a forcing point. I mean, they're got to figure out the exact date, but the goal is to sunset PL Slack, so there isn't an option to post in PL Slack.
Yeah,
that there will still be private channels and places to coordinate, but like, let's do it a lot closer to where we hope our community is, or where we know our community is.
Yeah, cool.
Just want to double tap on that real quick. Anybody who's on Matrix, fear not. I too am still on Matrix, and I don't think I'm going anywhere. But the Matrix and the Discord bridge, it's there. So no worries, anyone.
Yes, so same for me. I'm also on Matrix. I'm not on Discord, and I hopefully will stay on Matrix, and we have bridges, so we'll see. So
yeah, and if you have anyone on Slack, it is bridged too. So like, if you like the Falcon Slack, hopefully it should get there.
All right, cool. So what's next? Who's next?
Is it me? Yeah.
Yes.
Hello. It's my first time here. I have not really worked on something that is, I guess it is IPLD related, just not to the current code base. Basically, for the last 2 weeks, I've been trying to put like Linux repositories on IPFS, and I was finding that this was way too resource intensive. So I've made something that is lazier possible. So that's very custom code that just is capable to like chunk files and make directories, and actually handle symlink too. But it's doing basic Unix FS stuff. The goal is maybe someone will find it interesting. It's like the only real dependencies is Go IPLD CBOR and like Go CID and Go multi-hash. Everything else is I guess like a Go proto, but the DOS proto will freak out. It should be built in to the language at that point. Yeah, so that's basically it. So you give it like a directory, and it makes a car out of it. It uses a backend front buffer with a certain size to send the car while you are chunking it. And so right now I only send file to estuary, but yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Cool, thanks. That's great. So we've been through the updates. So now is the time to discuss other things. So if anyone has anything, you can put it on the agenda list, or you can just raise your hand. So it's also if you want to again like introduce yourself, or if you just want, or also if you have questions. So this is also the room to ask questions if you hit any problems, or I don't know, So feel free to speak up or put it in the meeting notes. I know.
Jeropo, have we pointed you to the Go car and Go Unix FS node variant of creating a car?
Yeah, so I have looked at this code, but I don't really like the way how it wants to use the data store. Yeah, I just like the car format is quite simple. Realistically, my only complaint, no, I have to complain with it, but the only real complaint I have is the fact that like it's using CIDs and not multi-hash for identifying blocks. But everything else is very simple and is like easy to understand. So
yep.
I've just made.
What do you mean by
myself.
the data store?
I did not find a way to like both add blocks, create the car while I'm doing it. Like I do mean the same at the same time. I'm not first chunking things and then making the car. I'm making the car. I'm like moving files in place with copy file range in Linux, and so I was finding like it was pretty hard to make zero copying work on the Go car API. And
yeah,
I just like
so this is so look at the Go car for car v2 and the CLI will allow a car to represent itself as a block store, so that the puts directly get written appending to the car.
Yeah, but it's like using a write call to do that, and a write is slow. So I'm using like copy file range to do kernel copies, and on the write file system with the write option and all of this, it like makes 0 copies. So it's not actually copies. It's like the car file has some data pointing to the data of the first file, and if you modify any one of them, it makes a copy on write. So it's really smart. It's basically hard links, except the data is shared, but like it's not if you modify it. So it's still fast, but nice.
It's some Linux or Unix or something specific syscalls in here. I see like things that look terrifyingly like integers that are raw syscall parameters going on or something.
Yeah, it's not even Unix. Actually, you don't need a raw syscall because if you use IO.copy by default, like it tries to default to writer to and reader from API, and file implement this with the reader from API. So in this very specific case, you could use just IO.copy and it works. But like I would need to give a file pointer or IO.writer pointer to the car, and while I'm sending the file, which I don't think like the API currently does.
Right. So broadly speaking, you're saying our API didn't give you enough direct access to where the bytes are moving around for you to.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Also, one thing, it's like, now that maybe the API could do, but I didn't look enough. But I had issue where like the API will require me to like know the CIDs of the thing I want to put, but I don't actually know because I'm literally reading the file while I'm copying it. And so like since the CID come before the file, so what I'm doing is like I literally have a X amount of bytes, a big file, and I just seek like to the end and I make sparse files. It's like a feature Linux has is you can seek to, I basically like seek to 30 gigabytes and I write seeking down. So every time I have a file offset counter, and when I write something, I just decrement it. And so that allows me to like, I have to have the header at the front, but I cannot because I don't know the header yet. So basically I just write everything at the end and I just zero copy everything or like send it over the networks once I know my header, which I don't know how clear I was on that, but
I think I'm going to have code to read slowly after this meeting, but I'm very excited about it. I think it makes sense. Yeah, you said you have to write backwards because you have these prefixes and you can't compute them until after. For what it's worth, I'm pretty sure people did discuss that at length when they were designing the car format, but the choice was to optimize for this order because if you're going to verify it while you're
exactly, this order is not bad. It's just not what I want. Like what I want is fast creation, and this order is likely better for reading than mine. But it's just I'm not reading the car, so it's not my problem.
It's pretty cool that when you're doing this to disk, though, you were able to actually like do it backwards and go fast.
Yeah, but that's because Linux is really cool. Like, you can just stick to anywhere in a file, and Linux managed to like know, hey, there is a 30 gigabyte hole. Don't put data there. Just know that the data is shifted X byte.
And then, okay, I have a question. I didn't know there was a syscall for this. So you're telling me you write backwards starting from an arbitrarily large offset, and then there's like a reverse truncate syscall, so the file starts somewhere new?
No, so that's sad. There is not that syscall. I looked it up, and there is not. However, what you can do is you can like clone with an offset. So you do a 0 copy from that file to a second file, and that works. However, that's a pain because copy file range doesn't do that because it thinks like there is an offset and it doesn't like that. So you need to like first copy the first few bytes to align it to your file system block size. So like whatever, and then you can idle file clone. So like there is 3 different syscall, no, 2 different one, but it's not actually like it's clear that it's a new feature in Linux. It doesn't clearly. Ideally, you just do copy file range and they kind of figure it out, but it doesn't in all cases, so that's kind of sad.
Good work.
Thanks. It's not actually like most of this is like very. It's far simpler than it looks. It's like genuinely, I was just like reading the car specs and implementing what I needed to do. Yeah.
I left a comment in the chat. There is actually a syscall to trim a file from the front. Again, with the ellipse polyfill, the way it's supposed to be. So you can totally do that.
Oh, there is. Oh, okay. It's just not named. Okay.
It's a flag. It's a flag to F allocate. It's not. Oh yeah, Zoom chat doesn't go to the.
Yeah, I don't think Zoom chat goes anywhere. So I'm just going to read this. The magic words are falloc _ fl _ collapse _ range. That Reba claims is going to write it from front.
And you know what? It's actually far better because it's not only as a front, you can do that anywhere. Oh, thanks. You made my thing even better.
Happy to help.
Do you? I'm really interested.
In a while.
I'm interested to know how much you gain by some of these things because it feels like the end card that you're making is very not block aligned. Like we've got all of these odd 40 byte-ish SIDs that you're putting in between every 256K or something like that.
Exactly. So to do that, I just use 2 megabyte blocks, and I think that like you can route about like 4K, something like that. I believe my block size is 4K, so I have 4K that is not rattling it, and like 4K each 2 megabytes is not a big deal. If you use smaller block size, obviously that would be an issue. Like more, because simply it's just bigger of a ratio. But like on 2 megabytes, like I'm at this point where I cannot test the speed. Like I'm either bound by the remote service I use, or I'm bound by the speed of my disks. Even when I test this with a RAM disk, it's my CPU getting slow because I cannot do the SHA-256 or Blake 2 fast enough. So at this point where I cannot test the speed of this anymore, I just think it's fast enough. It's like if I have to rent a few, rent a few huge server to test this properly, I think like it's fast enough. And yeah.
A couple more ideas. You can totally use murmur hash for your quote unquote hashing if you actually want to, still have proper. There is a very cheap non-cryptographic hash function that you can use to basically effectively remove the hashing stuff to see how how fast you're going. Also, any Ryzen CPU, which are pretty much ubiquitous on the cloud and elsewhere, does SHA-256 at about 3 gigabits a second. Gigabytes a second. So yeah.
Yeah,
that is not a recommendation to use murmur in CIDs. Do not use murmur in final CIDs.
I'm not going to implement that. I have directories, and they still have to have like current safe links. So I'm not going to do that. I do like it's only on one file because I was scared of FD exhaustion, but I have more multi-threaded chunking. So like if you have a quite big file, multiple blocks will get hashed at the same time, and like by default, I just do a number of CPUs. But if you have a really fast disk and you want huge queue depth, you can bump that like to whatever big number you want. So the hashing speed, you can just like, if you have big files, you can just throw more CPUs at it and it will work. But
that's super exciting. Like it's cool.
I don't know if I said it, but the docs are really nice. Like genuinely, I don't know who I must compliment for this, but I genuinely just look the docs and they were good. So I just like follow the docs. I didn't do anything really smart. I mean, I guess the zero copying stuff is quite smart, but it's just knowing stuff about Linux is not specific. So thanks to the one who made the docs, you made a great job.
It would be great
that
to
is
see a
either
benchmark
team effort.
of relative performance of like Go car create versus your car create, and like what order of magnitude you're getting faster.
Yeah. Oh, also one thing, my CRTs are like not, they don't match the current implementations. Like for the same file, I have different CIDs because I use different lengths. My directory and my root and directory creation code just try to fit as much stuff until reaching the block limit. So I have like 2 megabyte roots, which is better because less overhead. But the current like try to make something balanced. I don't have balanced root. However, I have balanced leaves, which the current thing doesn't do. Like if I have remainder, instead of having like also leaf be block size except one, I have like the remainder, which is 1 byte on each leaf until the remainder is done, and then I have leaf that are 1 byte lower than the first one. I don't know if that's clear, but it basically like all leaf are 1 byte maximum to the size of another leaf, and they all are almost the same size, which I found is neat. I don't know if it's actually useful. I guess it has better, like if you want random performance, is better because you don't have a leaf that is like 13 byte or something like that.
Yeah, I think that it's all fine, but I'd just be careful getting too close to that 2 megabyte limit. I mean, that really is in quotes limit, because we really are not sure exactly what the performance or the breakage is like as we approach that. So just be careful.
You might think that funny. Just for the creation of the root, I could not come up with an easy, reliable formula just to know how many things I could put in a root until it gets too big. So I literally do a binary search on the amount of thing I put in the root until it's perfectly at 2 megabytes, or like just below, just 1 root below, which is genuinely fast enough because binary search is surprisingly useful. Like log base 2, I really need to explain this, but it's fast enough and it does the job done.
If you should try some end-to-end with the data that you're creating that are getting to that limit, to make sure that they can go through the existing IPFS infrastructure and the gateway and all.
Yeah, my current test is uploading to Estuary and downloading to my IPFS node, and for now it works. So
cool. That's cool.
I guess that's why. Also, one thing I think cover the current IPLD thing. When you create roots in file, for each link, it has an empty name instead of not specifying the names. So this wastes 2 bytes each time because it waits a byte for the name signal of the link field. I don't know if how comfortable you people are with protobuf, but like basically, the first thing is like an ID telling what's the next field gonna be, and then for variable length types, it's just the length of the thing. And so basically, I noticed that for files, all links have a name that is equal like to quote mark. So it's an empty name, but it's like it's a leaf in a file. So I don't think it makes sense to have a name here. The current IPLD code base produce it, and that wastes 2 bytes per link, which is probably not a big deal, but I just find it like I don't really know what to do with this, but that was something funny I found.
The DAG-PB is history, and it's full of historical lessons. We'll call them lessons.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's sort of we've done all the work to specify it how it is, and the DAG-PB docs are that work. to specify the limits and the boundaries and all that sort of stuff. And then we've just sort of put it aside and say that's just how it is. And we can try and move on with new stuff. But for file data that wants to be IPFS compatible, it's sort of just got to fit within that box. And we've sort of agreed we're not going to attempt to improve or touch that. It's just as it is.
And my thing doesn't output this field, and it still work. So I don't know at which level. Like, I don't know if that's a protobuf decoding layer from Golang.
Can you point to the bit you're talking about exactly? Can you provide a link to the?
Is this the name field in DAG-PB?
Yeah, sorry. If you decode a DAG-PB block, take any DAG-PB block, make it either decode raw, pass it the DAG-PB specification, the format, and you will see that the name field in the links are empty for files roots. So when I'm in a file root, you have a UnixFS root that is pointing to these or other roots. And it's not a directory, so it doesn't make sense to have a name. So it's an empty name. However, an empty name needs 2 extra bytes, one for signaling and one for the 0 length. It's wasting 2 bytes per link in the UnixFS roots. That's all it is. It's
I believe that our DAG-PB specification says that the name field is required, that it's nullable but not optional, and so that causes us to say we always need to include the field even if it's 0 bytes, rather than just exclude it and skip it.
Okay, so it may just be luck, but Golang doesn't do differentiation between a nil thing and a 0 length thing. If you lend nil, it's always going to be 0. So maybe it's just that is working because Golang, or I don't know if it's protobuf that say, hey, that's a nil string, I will initialize it to 0. But in any way, it's working without. So
this is an interesting corner case, and because I wrote there's a new version of the DAG-PB codec for Go IPLD Prime, and I have to look up the details, but I'm suspecting that I'm not writing that field out when it doesn't exist, because we had this discussion last year about these optional versus nullable fields. And
I have not tested with Prime. I have only tested with Go IPFS, which to my knowledge doesn't use Go IPLD Prime. So
because if you look at Go codec DAG-PB, it doesn't use the Go protobuf stuff. It does its own protobuf authoring because this format is so simple. There's not really a good need to use the whole library when you can author it pretty cleanly. And the other thing that library does is it does some ordering things. So we care about things being in particular orders so that we get this determinism. But you might want to look at that. But that's an interesting edge case that I'm going to research.
Because what is this repo? Because I had the issue of the ordering and I could not fix it. So I've just admitted that my CRD was different than the official one. But if you're just using your repository can fix this, would be nice.
So that repository does have some layering in it. I mean, it's very IPLD Prime based, but there's some layering. There is potential to make some of this private stuff public if you wanted to consume it from the outside, or you could just copy and paste it, I guess. But name is optional. So in that one, I think it might leave the name as blank and not write it out. Has name, so it doesn't write the name tag. So DAG-PB, Go codec DAG-PB won't write out the name if it's not there. Which, if that's different to our other DAG-PB codec, that's an interesting difference. But I didn't think that was true.
Yeah, so Go UnixFS clearly writes it. I'm 100% confident. I can test it right now.
So I guess there's more spec work to do to describe the.
We're done with it. I spent so many hours on that thing. I wasn't sure we were done.
And it's not only about 2 bytes. Someone could say realistically, do you really want to fix something for 2 bytes? But it's also about
this is
one more item
the
to
thing.
decode, so like it makes all decoding slower if you want to decode that, because also like one more item that you have to seek and everything. So
this has come up. This keeps on coming up. This question of how much does it matter, and the thing that matters the most is compatibility, that actually stuff works. And then there's this secondary concern of convergence of same bytes equals same CID. That concern is that's really system dependent. That a lot of systems just don't. It doesn't matter. Like a lot of use cases, that's not interesting at all. It's just I want to get my stuff in and I want to get it out. But there are other places where that does matter, like when you're doing deduping or you're doing something that's got some sort of consensus or assurance base. So that's one of the biggest challenges with IPLD is communicating that difference, where convergence does matter in some cases, but in other cases, it's just not a concern. And this actually is one of the core discussions we keep on having around this place. Like I was having it last week with Will in the Unix FS node thing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So is there anything else? So because I know there might be agenda items that are not on the list, but people told me that they want to talk about. So Peter, do you want to talk about this CID thing or?
Oh, I actually thought that you would bring it up because it was actually mostly your idea. So I am just here to.
Okay, so I have thought you bring it up. Okay, so it's is there, so if there's anything else, I would talk about anything else, because I would try to recall the details because it was before the holidays. So but I have notes. And I will quickly talk about it. But so last chance to talk about anything else I will continue. All right. So basically what Peter and I was talking to before the holiday break was about CIDs. And so one discussion I think I'm losing the connection. Am I back?
No, you're here.
Sorry.
You're here.
Okay. Everyone was freezing for me, which is normally a sign that I'm the one who's freezing. So we talked about CIDs, and one discussion we also had several times here is that in the CID there is this field called codec. And what does codec actually mean? So is it an IPLD codec, or what is it actually? And so if, for example, people put some new multi-codec code into the multi-codec table, they want to, the question always is, do you want to put it into a CID or do you want to use it for something else? But we don't really have a good definition on like which multi-codec codes should go into this CID field called codec. And Peter and I was discussing this thing. And what we came up with is the idea of, instead of having its saying, well, it must be an IPLD codec or not, because then the also question is, what is an IPLD codec? Is the distinction really is the codec traversable or not? So we call it traversable. So what we mean by it is that the codec supports IPLD links, then it's traversable. So so let's imagine we have another column in the multi-codec table that says, is this thing traversable or not? And so when it is traversable and you put it into a codec that's traversable into the CID, then you would have you know that you might discover further links and can go deeper down. And if it's not traversable, you can't. So for example, the raw codec. You could discuss, is raw an IPLD codec or not, but it clearly is not traversable. That's clear because it can't contain links. And other codecs, like for example, you then have codecs like, let's say, Ethereum, where the question is Ethereum an IPLD codec or not? Because it's like, you can't represent the whole data model, but it surely is
Okay,
traversable.
hang on. No, we have a definition for this. The definition of an IPLD codec is a function that goes from serial byte sequences to the IPLD data model or back again. It does not require that a codec be a complete container for any data model values. We've sorted this. This is in the specs.
Okay.
Your topic here about whether a codec is flagged as traversable or not is interesting, but we have that definition of codec.
We don't have the definition within the CID spec. Basically, the CID spec does not say what the second variant actually is.
We have probably not propagated that definition back there, which is
yep.
awkward.
And where basically this, yeah, and where this discussion came from was basically that, you know, pinning systems, transport systems, they do not care what the codec actually describes. They only care, do I follow this or not? And if do I follow this, then they need to somehow obtain the knowledge how to actually follow this. But for most of the stuff, like for example, take the Filecoin chain, right? There is actually no clear place to know that the moment you encounter a COM-R, it's not something that you should think of traversing. Like there is nowhere to place this information. And that basically was the main takeaway, that when we argue like, well, is this a codec? Is this an IPLD codec? Or it's like some other weird thing? We had a conversation earlier today about how do I represent multi-hashes? Can I just put a quote unquote codec that says like this is a multi-hash? That most of the systems that do transport do not care about this at all. They only care, is this something that I can traverse or not? And yeah, the thing that we kind of settled on, like, oh, we actually need to just expose this information somehow, ideally through our centralized table, and kind of, you know, have that.
I guess my question is it at that table codec level? Because it feels like it's not a good match for that. It feels like it's a flag on a SID that's like a don't traverse this SID that is independent from the codec of the SID. Right, like I'll have Ethereum data. Some of the Ethereum data might not be is a terminal root node that doesn't have any other SIDs in it. Others I may well want to traverse. Likewise, the comps, their codec of the data that's stored in a Filecoin deal may be anything, right? Like this file, the label of this Filecoin deal, like it points to the SID of DAG-PB or it points to something, but I'm saying this is actually some other place that I'm not going to follow. I want to flag, don't traverse this here. I'm using it just as a representation of.
Right. You don't want that in the data. That's like application logic territory. You're going to need to decide that contextually. This is like what selectors are for.
Right. Exactly. Like what Will's describing, this is selector level stuff. Basically a prescription whether or not. What we were talking about, it's the traversability at all. Like there are codecs that you just cannot traverse, like no matter how hard you try. For instance,
I agree
JSON.
that is true. I'm a little confused.
JSON, but JSON. Yeah, go ahead.
I agree that that is true. There exist codecs which do not have links. I would pick a different word than traversability for this, ideally, by the way, because we call stepping over nodes to be traversal in a bunch of places. So that's, anyway, so doing like link jumps from one block to another block is only possible in some codecs. Yes, you could put a flag in the multi-codec table that says true or false for that. I'm not sure I followed what use that has other than documentational value. Like, is that going to actually unlock any technical capability or like any super sizable shortcuts in any tooling?
So I have a piece of, there's a bit of code here that that is in JS IPFS that I wrote for DAG export that essentially does, that hardwires some codecs, some known codecs by JS IPFS that say, if you find a block, this codec, don't bother loading it because you won't find links in it. So I guess it sounds to me like you guys are trying to make the case for having this information encoded in the multi-codec tables such that you could extract it out across a range of codecs. I'm just, how many codecs we're talking about here? Because there's raw, there's JSON, there's CBOR. Are we just going to talk? Are we talking arbitrary codecs that might like?
Think about it the other way. How many are traversable?
Well, how many codecs do we have? We don't have that many codecs.
We have more.
Is this a real problem?
Than you think. I mean, it is a real problem for a transport system that cannot know ahead of time, hey, this new thing that I'm getting here, is it something that I cannot pin / graph sync or whatever because I don't have the code?
I get that.
Or
I get
it's
that.
something that I don't care about.
I get that. I just, I've got 2 codecs in that little hardwired thing, which is, it's annoying to hardwire things, but I could put CBOR in there. It's just JS IPFS doesn't handle plain CBOR, but it's like it's 2 things, and I don't want to have to pull in the whole table to do that kind of thing. I just wonder how big the case is here, or are we making something more complex than it needs to be? I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm just wondering, is it the kind of thing that rises to the level of a problem yet? Because we don't have that many supported codecs across the various systems that are doing transport. We might have more. I mean, we're talking about expanding the range of codecs and doing, WASM codecs and all that sort of stuff. But for now, there's just not that many.
Correct.
Can do
and this way, yeah, and this goes back to Volker basically, because the conversation started from what is the second variant of a CIDV1? Like, is it an IPLD codec or not? And talking through that, what the insight was basically that the distinction isn't what kind of codec it is, but the distinction, the interesting part of this distinction, what is the second variant, is exactly this, the traversability of the thing. Because everything else is kind of application level concerns. Volker, correct me if I'm remembering.
No, I think that's correct. But if we, on the other hand, if we already have this definition of the IPLD codec, I guess basically the first step, at least to me, would be to make things clear in the CID spec, would be to clearly say it needs to be an IPLD codec, which I wanted to do for I don't know how many years, but that's fine. So I will look up the specification and see if it's like, but yeah. But
yeah, we should do that. I think we've been dragging our feet on that because we're scared of touching ancient documentation. But realistically, at this point,
but it comes to the problem of
does
like,
that.
well, the problem there is when we say if we use this definition, then of course, like everything that comes to bytes is IPLD, I guess. Like bytes in IPLD is an IPLD data model type kind.
Yeah, I think we have to set aside raw and treat that as a separate category, because whenever we do this, we have to bring in raw as the hypothetical. Oh, raw ruins everything. No, let's just put raw over the side.
Okay, yes. So to say, okay, so it must be so, because like this was my point, because like raw obviously is kind of, but you can always discuss that any codec is or any serialization is bytes, which obviously is true, but it doesn't make it an IPLD codec.
I mean, I guess
so that's fine. Like,
a slightly further a definition clarifier is, to be an IPLD codec, not only must it be a function from some serial bytes to some arbitrary non-deterministic data model tree output, it needs to be a defined and indeed deterministic transform from bytes to data model.
Does it have to be implemented in code? Like, what does it mean to be an IPLD codec? Can that be a theoretical IPLD codec?
I think at this point, if somebody makes PRs to the multi-codec repo, we should say, great, you should also include fixtures to the IPLD codecs repo area.
because the more we talk about this, the more we get towards the Filecoin CIDs, COM-P, COM-B, COM-D, and COM-R, which really do push the boundaries of this. So, yeah.
All right.
Let's not talk about them then.
Yeah. that's the best way probably. Yeah, so but like I'm just saying that this meeting is, so we've hit the hour mark, so hence I will close at least the public meeting. So feel free to stay for the after hour, although it probably will be quick because we're already like at 1 hour and normally the meetings don't go that much longer. So anyway, so thanks everyone for attending, and it's great to see so many people here. And I hope to see you all again in 2 weeks.